Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stolyarov II, and I am the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our U.S. Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. We have a fascinating conversation in store for you about the problems which face regenerative medicine, such as the need to attract investment in real-life projects rather than exclusively AI or digital ones. And this has been a problem that has been escalating within the longevity or regenerative medicine community because of the tremendous advances in artificial intelligence, which have led to a lot of researchers shifting their focus essentially in using AI to predict the outcomes of certain treatments or certain interactions in the real world, as well as, for example, screen for drugs that are potential candidates for going through clinical trials to treat a particular disease. And while these advances are highly promising by themselves, they cannot give us the entirety of what we need in order to achieve longevity, escape velocity in our lifetimes. So today, our panel consists of our Director of Visual Art, Art Ramon Garcia, our member from Texas who heads the Texas Transhumanist Party, Alan Crowley, and our Legislative Director, Jason Geringer. So welcome to our esteemed panelists. And our special guest today is Ariel VA Feinerman. Ariel began his career as an entomologist in 2003, enrolling in the Kaliningrad State Technical University at the Program for Aquatic Bioresources and Aquaculture. He was engaged in the study of aquatic insects, and he took part in several expeditions to the rivers of the Kaliningrad region and the North Caucasus. In 2006, he switched to learning programming. From 2010 to 2014, he worked as a software engineer. He took part in the development of games, computer graphics, and sound processing. In 2014, he enrolled in the physics department of St. Petersburg State University. And in 2015, he completed a practice in PCR, real-time PCR, DNA gel electrophoresis at the Faculty of Biology in the Laboratory of Plant Genetic Engineering. In 2015 to 2016, he completed a practice in genetic engineering at the Faculty of Biology in the Laboratory of Physiological Genetics. He participated in the screening of yeast genomes, participated in the testing of metal complexes for toxicity and biological activity using bacterial strains. In 2017, he transferred to the Baltic Federal University and continued his studies at the program of physics at the Institute of Physical and Mathematical Sciences and Information Technology. He studied biological molecules using NMR spectroscopy. In 2017 to 2018, he worked as a consultant in a bioengineering company. In 2017, he began work on education in the field of rejuvenation biotechnology and regenerative medicine. In 2018 to 2020, he was the deputy chief editor of the popular science resource Future Collector. In 2019, he received a Bachelor of Sciences degree in physics for the study of phospholipids using low-field NMR spectroscopy. In 2020, he founded the biotechnological company IntraClear Biologics OU in Tallinn, Estonia, and became its chief science officer. He is now a guest author of the publication Longevity Technology. He has been an allied member of the U.S. Transhumanist Party since 2017. So Ariel is well known to those of us who read the U.S. Transhumanist Party website because we've published various interviews and articles by him. And now, Ariel, welcome, and please tell us what you have to say about the importance of real-life projects in regenerative medicine.
Hello to all. Nice to meet you. I want to add to my biography that since 2025, I have been an advisory board member of Lifeboat Foundation. So now I hope to help more to regenerative medicine in the United States. And today I want to discuss some problems of implementing the regenerative medicine. There are technical problems which we usually focus on that, but also there are policymaking and financial problems. And today I want to discuss precisely them. But before, I would like to remind our people who watch and listen to us what about regenerative medicine and say a brief introduction to SENS research. So, according to various estimates, 50 to 80 million people died in the 6 years of World War II. Aging kills at least 100,000 people every day and at least 40 million people every year, the population of modern Canada, and only slightly less than the entire Second World War took. And unlike war, they have no chance to defend themselves. And they do not die young and healthy with weapons in their hands. Their last 5 to 10 years of life are filled with suffering and infirmity and pain, loss of dignity and dependence on family and friends. This is why we must make every effort to defeat aging as soon as possible and put an end to human suffering and diseases. On the other hand, I am very glad that the fight against aging has finally broken out of the world of science fiction and entered our lives. The inevitability of global changes in health is becoming increasingly obvious, and 2017 year was a turning point in many ways. For the first time, not only leading scientists, but also well-known politicians and economists spoke out about the fight against aging and regenerative medicine. So far, only in words and in scientific publications, but this is already a lot. However, there is still a huge gap between scientific publications and real life. And it is great that more and more people are not just talking about the fight against aging, but also taking real steps in this direction. On the other hand, the quality of these popular articles and steps is usually very low, but when was it high? And is in no way connected with regenerative medicine or rejuvenation. Many of them do more harm than good because they marginalize the already not very good reputation of a very important and necessary direction of research. In general, there is no enemy more dangerous than a bad ally. Because no modern medicine, not to mention all sorts of diets, fasting and diets that imitate fasting, dietary supplements, antioxidants, geroprotectors, exercises and other lifestyles are capable of rejuvenating the human body even for a month. And here is why. I want to say that it doesn't mean that lifestyles do not important. They are very important in the sense that a bad lifestyle can reduce your lifespan and health span. But good lifestyle cannot rejuvenate you. It cannot really prolong your life beyond your genetic capabilities. So we must have good lifestyle, but we do not focus on it as an only way to prolong our health and life. Most people unfortunately have no idea what aging is, and so I, in a few words, will try to explain it from the engineering point of view. One of the most popular and unhelpful definitions of aging is that the probability of an organism's death increases with time. In other words, the older you are, chronologically, the more likely you are to die. However, this has many flaws. For example, a newborn baby is more likely to die than a 30-year-old guy, but it would be a mistake to say that a newborn is older. To the point many turtles and fishes' survival rates increase with time, but this doesn't mean that they are getting younger. Finally, like all other statistical definitions, it says nothing about a particular person's chances of living a long and healthy life. A good definition not only allows us to draw many important and useful consequences from it. It also points us to a solution to the problem. Below we will consider aging itself and approaches to its solution from an engineering perspective. So, aging can be defined as a process of accumulation of molecular and cellular damages that are a consequence of normal metabolism. It is very important to emphasize the word normal here, because once you take it into account, it immediately becomes clear that it is impossible to slow down the aging process, much less stop it. To do this, you need to completely redesign the human metabolism, rewriting its genome. It is important to know that the processes that cause damage are also the processes that give us life. For example, breathing. Breathing generates a reactive oxygen species that kills us slowly, but at the same time, breathing generates energy which we need to live. But since we cannot influence the processes of damage accumulation themselves, at least at the current level of science, what can we do? Without interfering with the metabolic processes, we can simply remove the accumulated damage caused by them from time to time, returning the body to an earlier undamaged and, as a result, younger state. And first approach that I talked about, trying to slow down accumulation of damage by interfering with metabolism, is called a gerontological approach. And unfortunately, it is widely accepted in academic community. The second approach, so-called damage repair approach or engineering approach, or in other words, it can be called a regenerative medicine, is, in my view, the best approach because it does not touch our metabolism, leaves it untouched, but at the same time it clears out all damage that causes aging pathologies. And at first glance, the idea that reversing aging, rejuvenation, is not just the easiest but also the only possible way to combat it seems paradoxal. But think about what is easier, to build a machine that never breaks down, or to repair it in time. Never to litter a room, or to clean it in time. This is how our world works. Eliminating structural differences, junk and damage is much easier than controlling the complex interweaving of various processes that lead to their formation. Moreover, we don't even need to know the structure of the car and the purpose of the things in the room. All we need is another working car and a clean room. By comparing a broken car with a working car and a dirty room with a clean room, we can find out what parts and things we need, what needs to be replaced and what needs to be thrown away. Another good news is that we don't have to fix all the damage. For example, we don't need to varnish every scratch on the car and look for every speck of dust in the room. We just need to keep their level below critical so that the car can drive normally and the room is comfortable to live in. And the second differences between gerontological and engineering approach is that in gerontological approach, when we accumulate some level of damage, you cannot lower it. You only can slow down to accumulation of future damage. So people who already damaged and old, they cannot benefit from it. But in engineering approach, because it is about reversing, not slowing down aging, people at any age can benefit from it, because when we remove damage, all our biochemical processes return to normal state. We remove structural changes, the damage. And so structurally, this rejuvenation person is almost identical to the really young person. Okay, this is the essence of the strategies for engineered negligible senescence, or SENS, that Dr. Aubrey de Grey proposed in the beginning of the century in 2007 year. I hope everyone from you know about it, so I will not talk about it too deeply, because today's conversation is not about technical problems, but mainly about formal and financial problems. But I want to give you an example of the third approach to treating aging, so-called geriatric approach or compensatory approach. This approach is widely used in current medicine, and it is quite effective in the beginning of the aging, but then it becomes less and less effective. I hope you now understand why modern medicine, not to mention pseudo-rejuvenating technologies, can do nothing about aging. It does not eliminate its causes, molecular and cellular damage. It is based on a compensatory approach, intervention in the malfunctioning metabolic processes, and compensation for its numerous symptoms, with an equally numerous number of drugs. In its final form, it involves bringing the biochemical and functional biomarkers of an old and sick organism to those of a young and healthy one, without changing its structural features. But all these pathetic attempts to cope with the Lernaean hydra of a huge number of interdependent processes are doomed to failure in advance, and all it can do is only slightly smooth out the symptoms of aging, slightly slow down their progression, and ultimately only prolong the patient's suffering. The compensatory approach for the purpose of rejuvenation can be compared to regularly pouring gasoline into a leaky gas tank. It's an example of treating Parkinson's disease with levodopa, or even worse, turning on the afterburners on a worn-out engine. For example, it is like growth hormone injections in middle age. Let's consider, for example, such an aging pathology as arterial hypertension, high blood pressure. We know its true cause. The walls of arteries and vessels are rigid because of glucosapine cross-links and other interprotein cross-links. In fact, there is another cause, calcification of the vessel walls, but it is largely a secondary damage that occurs because of a general increase in the level of calcium ions in the blood as a reaction to chronic inflammation, and its cause, the senescent cells, can be eliminated by senolytics. Moreover, glucosapine cross-links themselves are a source of a chronic inflammation. The only reasonable method of treating hypertension seems to be dissolving glucosapine and returning the walls of arteries and vessels to their original youthful elasticity. But modern medicine does not yet have such drugs. Modern medicine only alleviates or compensates its symptoms by directly lowering blood pressure. It has dozens of different methods and even more different drugs in its arsenal. Some of them dilate blood vessels, relaxing their smooth muscles. Others reduce the heart rate. Others remove excess of water from the circulatory system, reducing its osmotic pressure. All of them have a lot of contraindications, incompatibilities with other drugs, and side effects. Well, what did you expect? Interference in metabolism, and a broken one at that, does not work well, not to mention that they do not eliminate the main cause. Yet pharmaceutical companies with quixotic resignation continue to pour billions of dollars into developing more and more drugs that don't work. Why they do this is another question, one that deserves a separate lecture. In the regenerative medicine of the future, based on the elimination of primary types of damage, everything will be different. Since hypertension is caused by interprotein crosslinks, the only way to treat it will be to break them. Of course, there will still be different therapies, different in quality, price, and effectiveness, but their principles of work, dissolving, breaking glucosapine crosslinks, and the end results, normalization of blood pressure, will be the same. As a bonus, you will get smooth elastic skin without wrinkles, because interprotein crosslinks are a main cause of skin wrinkles. And since glucosapine accumulates slowly, such proceeds will be needed only once every few years. Okay, this was a brief introduction into regenerative medicine, and before I will proceed to the next section, I ask you to ask questions if you have them.
Yes, thank you very much, Ariel, for the introductory part of your presentation. I will just ask one question, and then I will invite the panel to ask additional questions. So, do you think, based on the progress in regenerative medicine that you have observed in the course of your career, that we are on track to reach longevity escape velocity within our lifetimes? Aubrey de Grey himself states there's about a 50% probability in his view of longevity escape velocity being attained 12 to 15 years from now. Do you agree with him, or do you think he's being overly optimistic given the current rate of progress?
I don't like to talk about time frames because success in any area, and especially in scientific and engineering progress, is not a function of time. It is a function of our efforts. So it's completely dependent not on time but on our efforts. The more efforts we put on it, the better our chances. So I don't like to talk about time frames because of that reason. I think that current efforts are not enough to be over-optimistic, but I can see some light, especially in the past few years. So I only think I can say is that within the next 10 years there will be enormous shifts in medicine. But whether they will lead to longevity escape velocity or not, I cannot say. I am not a god and I cannot see a future. But I can put my efforts to bring these things to reality. So I think the only thing I have to do is not to predict the future or talk about time frames, but constantly push our efforts to make it a reality.
Yes, thank you for that answer. And I understand there are a lot of uncertainties in terms of the time frames in which these advances will arrive or are likely to arrive. And some of these uncertainties also have to do with non-scientific factors like societal, economic, political factors. And Alan observes in our private chat, it's not the years, it's the mileage in terms of the wear and tear on the organism. And there is a certain extent to which lifestyle can make a difference, but I would say it is at most a difference of plus or minus 15 years in biological age, in the sense that already by my age, I'm noticing some differences among people. And the differences may be a bit paradoxical. So, for instance, I run quite a lot, but I don't run the same amount as ultra running champions. I see some ultra running champions who are my age, who have placed very highly or won 100-mile races, who do climbing, who do a lot of extreme sport activities. So they do the running for a different reason than I do. I do it for longevity and health. And I notice they do look older than I do. They look more weathered. They even have other features of biological aging, which are surprising because they're still physically fit. They're still very capable. They could outrun me in long distances and they could do certain things that I couldn't, but they are biologically older than I am. So they did something through excessive wear to their bodies. But the fact is, I don't think there's a 60-year-old who is biologically a 30-year-old. I don't think there's a 45-year-old who is biologically an 18-year-old, notwithstanding any of Brian Johnson's comments. I think if you look at Brian Johnson, you could say, well, he looks very good for his age, but somebody being asked to identify his age would probably put him in his early 40s, whereas in reality, he's 47. So there's only so much that lifestyle can do. And I think it's important to stress that point to anyone who thinks they're going to live past the age of 130 based on healthy lifestyle alone. It's a good idea not to die prematurely, but to extend maximum lifespan, we absolutely need rejuvenation. Now, Jason has a question for you, Ariel. He notes that you went from studying insects to programming to longevity science. Was that your plan all along, or did you just kind of make it up as you went?
Yeah, with a brief stop for physics along the way, too. So.
Initially, I can say that all my time from my childhood, I worried about aging and death. So I wanted to not age, to not die, and be young and healthy forever. But when I began my scientific career in the beginning of the century, 20 years ago, there is almost no research in biomedical engineering, especially about longevity or rejuvenation. Even such words were unusual at that time. time. And I wanted to study insects, I wanted to study entomology, but at the same time I wanted to live alone and healthy life. And then it's almost every step if my life was accidental, but at the same time it was influenced by previous steps. So it was not random in its sense, but it was influenced by both, by my environment, by my life, and by previous steps in my life. So I wanted to study insects when I was 5 or 7 years old, and at that age I, of course, do not think about aging and death. At that age, children usually don't understand their own mortality. While when I grew up, it became clear that I will age and die somewhere in the future, and especially it was clear when I was 13 years old, and it was a big shock for me. And then I thought about various possibilities to prolong my life. And when I was 18, I wanted to study bioengineering or biophysics, something like that, but there is no such programs in my hometown. And then I decided to go to the field that I already know, the entomology, but it became quickly clear that I lost interest not in entomology itself, but in the university where I live. Also, not only there are no programs for bioengineering, but also there are no dedicated programs for entomology. And I studied aquabiology. And then after a few years I leave university and I became a self-educated programmer, and I worked about 10 years as a programmer in industry. And then I decided to return to science. Within that 10 years, there was a big changes in perception of longevity and rejuvenation, and I could see that there are chances to make a change in the world. And I thought to choose a field of science, educational program, strictly speaking, which will give me the more possibilities. And I chose physics because it's the most fundamental science that give you opportunity to work in almost every field, from pure mathematics to bioengineering, chemistry, biology, or medicine. I hope you know that the majority of Nobel Prize laureates in medicine and physiology were physicists or chemists by their education, and molecular biology is at most discipline that is a science that will be built by physicists mainly. So I chose physics as a fundament of my education, and I never regret about my decision. So then I got a physics degree and then started to study biomedical engineering, and now I keep my interest in physics, and at the same time I continue my self-education in biomedical engineering and preparing to get in a PhD, and I hope to move to the United States soon to continue to get PhD in either physics, for example biophysics. It will be a continuation of my university work about structural biology, or in medical or biomedical engineering, for example genetic or cell engineering. I'm interested in both these fields, and they are quickly interchanged and they have many similarities, so I think that degree in either of them will be very valuable for my work.
Yes, thank you very much for that answer regarding your academic path. And certainly I can see the interrelationships among those disciplines. And I will also say people who delve into multiple disciplines have a higher likelihood of making contributions in a variety of fields because they could see insights that those who are just narrowly specialized in one field cannot. And this is actually one of our purposes for our virtual Enlightenment salons, to bring in people with these interdisciplinary insights and see if we can break new ground in terms of understanding certain phenomena or figuring out solutions to certain phenomena.
And I want to say that my experience in software engineering, in programming, has a huge impact on my views in biomedical engineering. And I think that biomedical engineering should be as advanced as other types of engineering, like programming engineering or aerospace engineering. And even more, I firmly believe that medicine itself is a type of engineering, because it can be thought of as human repair engineering, in fact. So for now, unfortunately, medicine is more art than an engineering. And I want medicine to be a more engineering discipline. So I hope it will become a truly human repair engineering with all engineering background. It's very useful in medicine when you treat human body as a very complex self-repairing machine.
Yes, indeed. And I will also note that Aubrey de Grey got his start in his career path as a programmer, and I think that was crucial to get him to recognize the merits of the engineering approach toward combating aging, because he saw that people who were just pure biologists, they were more focused on just understanding aging and the processes of aging and not so much in intervening them or fixing them. So he brought a much needed, fresh and different perspective from an engineering background and approach. So thank you for that discussion. Please proceed with the next part of your presentation.
Okay, now we will talk about problems with governmental funding of regenerative medicine. If you take a close look at National Institutes of Health or National Institutes of Aging funded work, well, you will find hundreds of publications about obesity, lifestyle, air pollution, and their impact on longevity. Don't you know that obesity, smoking, and much drinking of alcohol is bad for you? How can this information may help us create a new cure against cancer or atherosclerosis? Do we really need another one work on it? Also, you can find many publications about calorie restriction and various genetic manipulations on worms and other model organisms that mimic it. Calorie restriction is everywhere, while we know for 20 years that calorie restriction doesn't work for humans and high primates. For example, in 2015, $500 million was given to projects like a large randomized trial of vitamin D, omega-3 fatty acids, and cognitive decline. It's not a joke, it's a real research work. You can find more on the site of National Institutes of Health. All that is useless because you cannot use it to produce working rejuvenation therapies. Only a small part of this work is useful in the sense of defeating aging. Do you know what is the most interesting? It's all your taxes, all your money. Now you know that. And for example, the budget of National Institutes of Health is constantly growing, and in 2025 it is almost $5 billion. And unfortunately, the grant system of National Institutes of Health do not check for what this money is spent on. For example, my former scientific advisor several years worked in National Institutes of Health, and they said to me that they found that when you enter this system, you can get money for nearly everything. People really got money for studying butterflies in Amazon rainforest, for example, and only they have to do is to write somewhere in the end of this article that this work may help create medical treatment somewhere in the future. And this is enough for National Institutes of Health. So it is quite difficult to get grant from National Institutes of Health. But when you inside this system, when you already enter in this system, you can spend governmental money for nearly everything. And I think it's very bad because National Institutes of Health is a health organization. It's a medical organization. And I firmly believe that they have to spend their money only on those research that directly related to human health, to the medicine, to the creating of new therapies, new tests. There are only two sorts of medical good things that can be funded by government. First is medical tests to test human organism whether it have a disease or not, and second is that therapy to treat or prevent a disease in the case if that human organism has that disease or can have that disease. And current situation, I think, is not normal. When governmental money, then every year 5 billion of money spent for something that we even do not know for. Where? I want to ask, where is the results? $50 billion is a very big money. And I want to ask, where are results? And at the same time, really important research projects, like work on glucosapine breaker therapy, which will end many aging pathologies like arterial stiffness, chronic inflammation, hypertension, strokes, and will save many lives. For example, it was Stuckenspiegel lab at Yale University is permanently underfunded and would be closed in 2017 without financial support from SENS Research Foundation and German entrepreneur Michael Grave. Likely, they finally found an investors, and now they spun out a company called Revel Pharmaceuticals. Unfortunately, they are still in a stealth state, and I many times have tried to reach Aaron Cravens, their CEO, but he rejected an interview, unfortunately, because they are not ready for disclosure their information about this therapy. But he promised that they will make a statement soon, so we wait for them. And finally, the cost of implementing the walk-in rejuvenation treatment, for example, in old mice, the implementing all the SENS program in old mice, so-called robust mice rejuvenation, would by current estimates be only 1 to 2% of the Apollo program. And the same amount of money, about $500,000, was already spent on sirtuins, which have obviously produced nothing. If you remember, there was such a company Sirtrix and such genes called sirtuins that allegedly could prolong human health and life. And this research was led by David Sinclair, a famous researcher from Harvard Medical School, and he spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on this research, but finally it was bought by one of big pharma companies and closed because in fact there are no real results from it. So all this money, and that was known initially because the mechanism of action of their alleged therapy was not a damage repair approach. So it was initially known that it will not work. But nevertheless, they spent a big amount of money for that and got nothing from it. So this is an example what I called junk research. One of the reasons this takes place, I think, is because people from academia are mostly not biomedical engineers, but gerontologists. Gerontology is a basic science which studies aging, while biomedical engineering and regenerative medicine are engineering disciplines which do not study aging, but try to influence aging, try to fix broken human organisms. This is a much difference between basic research and engineering research. And I think that, unfortunately, still in academia and in governmental agencies in the United States, the most of the positions are taken by classic academic researchers, classic gerontologists, who are not interested in results, who are interested in academic careers, in publications, in Hirsch Index, in various grants, in their perception by other members of academic community, but they are clearly not interested in curing people. They are not interested in caring of patients. And I think that we need a change. Of course, academia must have basic researchers. I do not want to say that basic research is bad. No, basic research is very good because it's a fundament to all other research and engineering. But these people have not to work in governmental agencies who spend money on things that must have direct results related to human health. Only those people who work on real regenerative medicine, on biomedical engineering, may make decisions and rule in governmental agencies, because their goal is not to get knowledge, but to use knowledge to help people. And so we need to have less gerontologists who merely study aging and more biomedical engineers who repair damage. In other words, we should switch our focus from aging research to rejuvenation engineering or regenerative medicine. It's almost the same terms, even though regenerative medicine is slightly more general term, because regenerative medicine works not only in the case of aging, but also in the case of traumas of young people. So I prefer to more generally term of regenerative medicine. Since aging is an engineering problem, then from the gerontologist's point of view, it looks like not my job to reverse it. So this is why I ask to invite more real regenerative medicine researchers and biomedical engineers to work on it. And luckily, there is some good change in past few years. The one of the few good things that past White House administration leaves to us is Advanced Research Project Agency for Health, or ARPA-H. It was established in 2021 as a $6 and $5 billion agency and is meant to be the biomedical equivalent of the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, DARPA, known for developing GPS and the Internet. As at DARPA, a small group of program managers will have considerable freedom to choose many of ARPA-H's efforts and specific awardees. Unlike National Institutes of Health, it didn't initially ask for long applications full of supporting data, just 3 pages outlining a vision or major goals and how to achieve it. There's a big difference, because ARPA-H is not in academic, like National Institutes of Health, but in industrial way. It works as an industrial company, biomedical company, and it's very good because it allows it to achieve great results in very short term. In contrast to DARPA research, which is meant to help the military, ARPA-H projects aim to improve the health of all Americans. And even more, unlike National Institutes of Health, when all applicants must have academic positions in the United States, the applicants to ARPA-H, they need not to have academic positions, and even foreign citizens can apply for contracts in ARPA-H. So this is a very, very good idea. And if ARPA-H successfully follows its namesake's history, the backbone of the agency will be its programs, so-called programs, led by a so-called program manager who conceives an idea, then assembles an outside team of scientists to carry it out with funding that might be $100 million or even more. And teams selected by ARPA-H, funded with contracts rather than grants, will work closely with the agency and could have awards pulled if they don't meet milestones. It's a different way of thinking, and it's not for everyone. They estimate only 10 to 20% of academic researchers will find it appealing. And I think that this paradigm that ARPA-H uses is very good for any types of engineering, and especially for regenerative medicine, because it's not like in National Institutes of Health when you are getting to this flow of almost free money and you work for many years without any results. In ARPA-H you must write a report every 6 months, and if you do not meet your promises, you will pulled out of the program. And I think it's very good because it will keep away all these academic researchers who just want to make their academic careers and not create real results. And unfortunately, a new administration fired out René Weggen, director of ARPA-H, who built this agency. In fact, this is normal because every new administration usually changes directors of governmental agencies. But the issue view is that René Weggen was the best person to rule this agency, and they still do not find a new director of the agency. So if someone from the US officials listen to us, I ask them either to return René Weggen to her position or to find someone as genuine as her, because it slowed down the work of this amazing agency. And I would like to say that this RPH agency is a really amazing, wonderful endeavor which can be compared to Apollo project for its importance for the United States economy and science and healthcare. Okay, so if you have questions about this section, I will be glad to answer them.
Yes, thank you very much, Ariel, for this part of your presentation and discussing some of the poor incentive structures that have historically characterized funding of medical research. Particularly, you mentioned the NIH grant project. And it's interesting because various scientists have complained to me and to others that the NIH is notoriously unwilling to fund projects that may be extremely effective in the long term for reversing biological aging, but they are uncertain in terms of their outcomes. So there could be a long research time frame, and then at the end of that time frame, from one's initial vantage point, it's not really clear whether or not that research will succeed. And the NIH, per my understanding, grants about 20% of the applications that it receives. So about 80% of the scientists who apply for grants do not receive the money. But it's interesting that sometimes the criticism that I hear is that the NIH is very conservative. They only want something that will bring near-term results, and those could be incremental results, but they could say, especially to politicians or to taxpayer advocates, oh, we've been spending taxpayers' money wisely. See, here's this published paper that arrives at certain conclusions. But you also said the NIH sometimes funds speculative research, like potentially research on butterflies, where the grant application says, well, someday this could be translated into medicines. And on the one hand, an argument could be made, oh, there are plants and animals, especially in remote parts of the world, that could have properties that could be beneficial for human health, and it would be good to study them and understand those properties and their potential applications. But at the same time, I would also agree that that is not the most direct path, and that is not the path that is most likely to succeed to getting us to longevity escape velocity in our lifetimes. So why do you think the NIH is more likely to fund the butterfly research, which is very uncertain as to the medicinal applications, as compared to, say, SENS type damage repair research, which also has a long time frame and some uncertainty, but could provide some significant benefits if it succeeds? What do you think is happening there in terms of the thinking in the agency?
I think that there is some history reasons, because NIH is an old organization with their own rules and traditions, and I think it's sometimes more valuable to make something new from scratch than trying to change something long existed. And RPH is a good example of that. I think that just because NIH is, unlike its name, it's more academic than goal-directed industrial type institution, and it has a long application process and very bureaucratic process, very formal process. It has a long-term traditions and has people who work in NIH for many years, and they are from the epoch when damage repair approach was not grounded, was not even considered, and this is just and I think this is a reason. So So, and the NIH principles that some of them are formal, some of them are informal, but they are slightly outdated. And I think when, one of the physicists said that new ideas gained popularity not when people understand them, but when the people who defended old ideas die from aging. So I think that NIH will change when a new generation of researchers who from the beginning study regenerative medicine and biomedical engineering will take positions in it, but we cannot wait for that, and I don't want that any of them die. So it's not very altruistic to wait when the old generation of researchers will die. So I think that we will make changes just today, and that is the reason why ARPA-H was created. It's not a concurrent to NIH because their very approach is completely different, as I explained. So I even do not consider NIH for my applications, both for formal and informal reasons, but my projects and projects of my colleagues completely fit in ARPA-H agenda. So I think that it's very, very good endeavor, and I think that it have at least such money as NIH. I think if ARPA-H has 50 billion per year, many projects will be already have done. You said a valid point that many research involved in regenerative medicine have some uncertainties and long term, but for now, of course, I can say we do not all about aging, and we for many years will not know all about aging, but I can say that we know enough about aging to treat it and to at least begin to create therapies that will reverse it. And the idea of longevity escape velocity, as you know, is not to create a 100% effective therapy from the beginning, but to create a therapy that will somehow help people, and this will buy some years, and these years will allow us to create more effective therapy that will buy even more years, and this step by step we will reach the state when we completely defeat aging. So we already know enough to do many things, and I will in the next section give you a few examples of the companies and their technologies that already can cure incurable diseases, but they cannot get money for that. So I think that ARPA-H have to be a first priority agency for the White House administration. I hear everyone that about artificial intelligence, and that Trump and Elon Musk and other people in the United States who make politics, they constantly talking about artificial intelligence and their importance, and that we need to invest in it, but unfortunately no one of such high-level persons talk in the same way about regenerative medicine and healthcare. I cannot see such talks, and I think we have to talk about it. We have to write an open letters to White House administration, to policymakers, to senators from American Congress, to any influential people you know, so that this problem will be constantly pushing to this. So this problem will be constantly on our screens and newspapers, and I think this is very important.
Yes, thank you for that answer. And now, Alan, I know you have several questions, so please go ahead.
No, thank you, Ariel. I do have several questions, and I appreciate what you're saying. I want to kind of give you my background from the military, because the military gets tons of funding. And I think this idea that it sort of scared me when you said it, that, folks at the NIH, they're just wanting to mark their careers in time and not actually deliver any results. And oddly enough, a lot of the people in the military are just the opposite, which is not what you want in science or the military, right? You don't want, it's like, yeah, you learned how to make a war, but our real job is just to punch our time, do our career, and make the peace happen, right? So it's really kind of interesting to see that difference and the difference in funding, how it's just shoveled on top of the military without any checking. And yet basic research, which, I guess nobody wants to go up in front of Congress and say, well, we've found 10,000 ways that a light bulb doesn't work, We are really onto it. They want to be, which is the basic research, right? We need all of that basic research to find out these materials don't work. These materials don't work. These two, they combine. We can make that work. Anyway, that's just not a popular call to say we've been researching this for years and we still haven't found anything. Right? It's counterintuitive, but that's where the real breakthroughs come in. And yeah, I think that one place where the Army or the military has been really good is in this thing, the creation of what's called a tiger team, which I think is actually from Deming, the guy that Deming's 14 points about industry, but the military picked that up. They have tiger teams to this day. But the idea is to bring in several experts, personnelist, a logistician, an operator, an intelligence expert. All these people come together to really build a team about how to do something. And I see a lot more kind of stovepiping in science because, specialization, if you're really specialized, all of a sudden you're an expert in something nobody else knows simply because you've become a little bit smarter. You've spent your time looking at widgets, but as for the applications of widgets and being able to have a broad, expansive understanding of all the different ways widgets can be used, that's a whole other field that almost comes into philosophy or psychology or those practical applications. So all of that to say, how do we get the bioengineers and the gerontologists and the money all in the same room at the same time? And I read in prep for this, an article on longevity technology about the company Intraclear. And it sounds like Intraclear got what a lot of companies get. They got a very supportive angel investor to come in and help. And yet it's those supportive angel investors that want the quick turnaround and not kind of the slow money that really government can provide to say, hey, take your time, get this right. This is going to benefit everybody once it's released to the general public. So what are your, other than what you've already told us, please, sir, give us how do we get the money and the people in the room together?
Okay, thank you for your question. You ask how can we build teams that will involve researchers of different origin and investors so that these teams will have money and all they need to do what we need, yes?
Well, yeah, a diversity in experience and specialties. I don't know that they're each going to bring a pocket full of money, but somebody needs to get the research done. And is that a government? Is that a coalition of governments? Is that a coalition of universities? I'm not sure it's the right place for private equity because it's a long-term, unless you're going to crank out a new drug or something like that. Just pharmacological team can do that. But we're talking about longevity, which, continued research on the blue zone has shown that not every technique there works, but many of them do. A lot of that is lifestyle. If you live a lifestyle that's easy on your body and you take care of yourself and don't get damaged and repair damage you get, those things are essential to longevity. But there's no profit in me telling anybody that, right? So there's no reason to say, well, I'm going to invest in your company so that people learn to eat the right foods, which, there's no ROI on that, like immediately for a company to give a company motivation to invest. How do we draw that money and the multidisciplinary teams together?
Okay. When you and your colleagues say that it's very unclear which research will give us a working therapy and which will unworking therapy, it's right, but not on the 100%. Why? Because, in fact, I was trained as a physicist and worked as a software engineer. So in these fields, we usually, before any experiment or writing the code, we used to make theoretical calculations, whether it was math or just it was some theorizing, but we, before making something by our hands, we must to be sure that it will work at least theoretically, at least from the theoretical point of view. And this training is very helpful. This helps me a lot in biomedical engineering and regenerative medicine. Because unfortunately, when I talk to my colleagues from classic medicine or classic biology, unfortunately, they do not use theorizing or thought experiments or calculations before making something by hands. And unfortunately, many of them work in the way as, let's change this gene and look what will happen. For example, let's try it or let's try that. I think that a real engineer shouldn't work in that way. I'm sure that real engineer should make any experimentation or proposals only based on their good theory. British physicist and philosopher David Deutsch said that the most valuable thing in the world is a good explanation. So when you can explain why your therapy will work, this is very valuable, and this is a proof, even though theoretical, but nevertheless the proof that it at least can work. It of course doesn't mean that it will work, but at least it can work. And it means that I can see that many companies and governmental programs work on the ideas that will not work even theoretically. So it shocks me. It is a big surprise for me because I used to work in completely another way. And I think that even though human health is much less predictable than more simple physical systems or computer software, but we can in some situations make good predictions, and we should do them. And what I can say, I have a very simple and clear recipe to say what will work and which will not work. For example, if a therapy or technology is based on a damage repair approach, so if it reverses some type of damage, it at least may work. And we should put some effort to test it. But if it doesn't clear any type of damage, and merely interfere with metabolism to influence some metabolic pathways, we should not even try it, because it's completely useless. Not at all, in the sense that, for example, there is some exception. Look at chronic inflammation. The main cause of chronic inflammation is senescent cells that produce various types of inflammatory molecules that influence other cells, and these cells become, this is a secondary senescence, so-called replicative senescence, and in such a way inflammation spreads across the human organism. And so only truly working way to get rid of inflammation is senolytics therapy, so the therapy that kills senescent cells. But in some cases,
one apple spoils the bunch. Got to get rid of that one apple before its effects can, I mean, literally in the case of an apple, that exudes gas. It causes other apples to rot.
Yes. But for now, most anti-inflammatory drugs work in another way. They block the receptors of these inflammatory molecules. So they interfere in inflammatory pathway somewhere near its end, not the beginning. And the consequence is that inflammatory molecules is spread across organism and do harm, but not such a big harm as if we do not block these inflammatory receptors. And the problem is that when we stop to take these anti-inflammatory drugs, for example, aspirin or something another, inflammatory quickly return. So we suppress not the inflammatory process, but the reaction by the cells and tissue to that inflammatory molecules. So we need to indefinitely, constantly take these anti-inflammatory drugs. And the more importantly, not all inflammation is bad. For example, when we have some sort of trauma or infection, inflammatory may be good to suppress the cause of this disease. But anti-inflammatory drugs do not distinguish between good inflammation and bad inflammation. So in general case, anti-inflammatory drugs do not really help people. They only slightly decrease the harm done by chronic inflammation. But they may be good For example, in the case of acute inflammation, for example, if so-called cytokine storm, you know that condition, when, for example, people caught some infection and it caused a huge burst of inflammatory molecules and people can die of this acute inflammation. And in this case, of course, just blocking an inflammatory receptors is a very good idea because organism will conquer the infection and inflammation will drop to its normal level. But in the case on aging inflammation, so-called inflammation, or chronic inflammation by autoimmune diseases, for example, these blockers of inflammatory receptors do not work in that way that we want to. So this is an example that sometimes interfering with biochemical pathways is good, but it's not a solution. It's just a step for acute cases, for emergency cases. But in combating with aging, we have to use only those solutions that really affect the cause, that eliminate the cause. So the damage repair approach. And when we know the mechanism of therapy, we can certainly say how it works, whether by damage repair approach or by interfering with metabolism. And I think that in the case of long-term results, in the case of really defeating aging, we should put most of our efforts into damage repair approach therapies. So, in fact, when we're working on the therapy, we cannot guarantee that it will work, but by knowing its mechanisms, we at least know the chances that it will work as expected.
Yes, thank you, Ariel, for that answer. And I do have a bit of a follow-up to Alan's question. So, getting some gerontologists and more engineering-focused scientists and investors in the same room has actually been tried several times before, most notably by Calico, which was established by the founders of Google, as well as now Altos Labs, which is funded in part by Jeff Bezos, but also Yuri Milner. And Altos Labs focuses more on cellular reprogramming. Calico, it seems, focuses more on fundamental aging science. But in neither of those cases, even though they spent a lot of money, hired some of the most recognized and, according to some, most accomplished scientists in the field, we don't yet see a lot of outputs from either of those companies in terms of therapies or even translational research or even intermediate results that they've published that could show how aging might be reversed in the future. And there have been some previous situations like this as well. For instance, Larry Ellison, the founder of Oracle, had donated in the past about $200 million. He said it was to anti-aging research, but he stopped doing that even sometime during the early last decade, the 2010s. Then there was Peter Thiel, who donated a few $1 million to the SENS Research Foundation during its early days and helped it to get launched. But he doesn't donate that much to aging research anymore. And then there's Brian Johnson, who is, I would say, very notorious these days for not actually donating to anti-aging research, even though he has the "Don't Die" motto. He says AI will solve everything soon, and he has had some negative experiences when he was previously investing in certain projects that didn't work out. At least that is my impression. But what do you think explains the fact that there have been these kinds of attempts, including by people with big money, and yet they haven't resulted in the damage repair approaches being emphasized, and they haven't resulted in the publication of a lot of promising intermediate results even?
Yes, I can comment it in a few words. The case with Calico is explained. They failed just because they hire basic researchers to directors' positions. And in fact, all their research was directed by basic researchers. And Dr. Aubrey de Grey said about it almost 10 years ago. So it's no surprise. It's no surprise. much more surprisingly to me that almost every case when some wealthy people try to fund some anti-aging research, in almost every case they spend their money not on the damage repair approach, but on the classic gerontological approach. And it's quite surprising to me, but it may be because how people who do not know anything about regenerative medicine will decide to whom he will give his money. How? I think they all behave in the same way. They look at the social media or newspapers and they see some names of well-known gerontologists and they ask them and they suggest them to whom to give their money, and this is a vicious circle why it all fails in the end. And I think that this is because people fall in the big misconception that gerontology is something about fighting against aging. No, gerontology is about studying aging, while regenerative medicine is about curing aging or any other type of damage or bad condition to human organism. And I never heard about that project. It's called biomedical engineering project or regenerative medicine project. All of them are called something like anti-aging project or aging project, and I think it's the reason why all this happened. And I already said about that. We can switch focus from gerontology to regenerative medicine and state that it is an engineering. And one of the problems is that anti-aging and anti-aging research is seen by many biomedical engineers as quite marginalized field, and many biomedical engineers whom I know personally do not want to associate themselves with this field, with anti-aging, with longevity, with all these words and groups of people. They work on real regenerative medicine that will really reverse aging, but they never said about their work as anti-aging medicine or something like that. They call like work precisely biomedical engineering or regenerative medicine. And this is, I think, the reason why these things happen. The people who really work on anti-aging treatments do not call these anti-aging treatments and do not be associated with that field. Mainly for historical reasons, probably.
Yes, and I've had conversations with Dr. Bill Andrews about this. He pointed out that in the anti-aging field, the so-called snake oil salesman came first and the reputable scientists came later. But there has been a kind of reputational stain on the anti-aging field because initially, say in the early 1900s, it was associated with a lot of quacks and charlatans who would sell substances of dubious validity marketed as anti-aging substances, and sometimes they would have damaging components like cocaine, for instance, or various poisonous substances. And unfortunately, that tainted perception still lingers in certain corners of the scientific community. Now, Alan does have a follow-up question in terms of wealthy individuals who used to fund anti-aging research to a significant extent, whether or not it was funded optimally. And he wonders, did they stop funding that research altogether, or did they stop funding it publicly? He also wonders, maybe the wealthy have their own teams working on this just for them. And on the one hand, we know that Brian Johnson has a medical team of his own, but that medical team is very openly discussed, and primarily they are there to set up various diagnostic procedures, measure biomarkers, monitor for unforeseen consequences, intervene if there's the need to do that. So Brian Johnson has a very clear personal health optimization goal, and this medical team is doing that for him. What do you think about others who have previously taken an interest in funding anti-aging research? Do you think they have their own medical teams? And do you think those teams are also focused on damage repair to some extent? So Larry Ellison, interestingly enough, was recently given praise for his appearance, and even Brian Johnson praised him. Larry Ellison is 80 years old. And if you look at pictures of him, he looks like he's 65. So if there's this plus or minus 15-year difference between chronological age and biological age, Larry Ellison may have maximized the, let's say, slowing down of biological aging that could be achieved using today's technologies. But do you think this is more widespread than commonly known, or are they just using techniques that everybody knows about and they just have more money to devote to that?
In fact, many ways to create regenerative therapies to reverse aging are known. They are published in scientific publications, and to replicate them or to create them using these publications, I think any good bioengineering lab can do this. So I will not be surprised if there are some offshore clinics or laboratories that privately offer such therapies to wealthy individuals, because as I said above, we already know enough about aging to fight against it. And the only reason why we cannot see this in usual clinics is lack of funding and medical regulation. Some of this I already said, and some I will said in the next section. So I do not know such cases, but I'm sure that this is completely possible with current state of biomedical engineering and medicine to do many of these therapies and offer them privately.
Yes. Thank you for that answer. And I think right now it would be a good idea to proceed to the next part of your presentation. So please go ahead.
Okay, next is problems with private investing. Previous was governmental funding and now problems with private investing. And I think that the private sector should play a lead role in funding rejuvenation therapies, but unfortunately what we can see, in my opinion, it's very terrible that many so-called digital health companies receive 20 to 50 millions of dollars, while vet bioengineering companies which work on true regenerative therapies that can cure incurable pathologies cannot get a miserable 5 to 15 millions of dollars to finish their work. I can name two companies which have wonderful technologies. First is Origin Biotechnologies, is an American company led by Gary Hudson. You know them, I hope. And I talked to them a few months ago, and he said that they struggled to find a needed amount of money to finish their gene therapy against senescent cells and against cancer. But likely their partner company, Fusogenics, which created a fantastic delivery system, so-called proteolipid vehicle, which is a microliposomes, microscopic spheres of double-layer lipids, which encrusted by so-called fusogenic proteins. These proteins were gathered from viruses, which used them to get into the cells through the cell membrane. And they used these microliposomes with these fusogenic proteins on their surface. These microliposomes are quickly fuse with a cell membrane and deliver their molecules inside them into the cell. And these molecules are usually RNA or DNA for gene therapy. And this unique technology that much superior than traditional virus systems for delivering gene therapy. And this company, Fusogenics, got 20 millions of dollars, but unfortunately not from a United States investment company, but from a Canadian investment company. So it's quite ridiculous that one of the most innovative American companies cannot find money in its own country and get invested by Canadian investors. I think it's a shame for American investors and venture companies that they do not invest their own companies that have a technology much superior than anyone have in the world. But unfortunately, the Origin Biotechnology company itself is still in need of money. They still cannot find an investment for their fantastic gene therapy that can make a revolution in treatment of chronic inflammation and cancer. cancer. They publish interviews about their technology in longevity technology, and I took interview with Gary Hudson some years ago, and they can be found on my blog and Medium. So this is one example. And second example is Covalent Biosciences company, which I'm helping now. I'm trying to help them now. Already they are closing because of lack of money, and they try to get money for 7 years and unsuccessfully. And they have as a fantastic therapy as Oizin's therapy against inflammation and cancer, against senescent cells and cancerous cells. Covalent Biosciences technology is a catalytic antibody technology. You of course know how works conventional antibodies. They are widely used in medicine today, and they work in such a way. These antibodies stick to antigens, unwanted cells or molecules. For example, it may be broken proteins or infectious agents like viruses or bacteria, and they mark these unwanted agents for immune system. And immune cells, macrophages, they are guided by these antibodies that sticks to these foreign agents or unwanted or dangerous agents. They engulf these molecules or organisms and kill them or break them. For example, in such a way works antibodies against Alzheimer's disease, against other types of amyloids or tau proteins. They stick to these molecules, and then immune cells destroy these molecules. But there is a big side effect of such a way. The side effect is acute inflammation. Because they activate immune system, it leads to acute inflammation and may lead to cytokine storm and a quick death of a patient. Even if they do not lead to acute inflammation, it anyway, and constant activation of immune system leads to chronic inflammation, which mainly breaks all good effects of these consequences. These side effects, this chronic inflammation shadows the good effects of this therapy. So yes, this therapy clear, for example, brain from beta amyloid, but at the same time they influence a chronic inflammation in the brain, and this chronic inflammation do the same harm that beta amyloid did previously. So this is the reason why patients almost do not benefit from these types of treatments. But Covalent Biosciences invented a completely new type of antibodies, so-called catalytic antibodies. They work in completely another way. They do not recruit immune system to destroy these unwanted molecules or bacteria. They behave like enzymes themselves. They stick to unwanted molecules and break them without recruiting immune system. So there is no chronic inflammation. And because of these enzymes themselves, this catalytic antibody can destroy about 1,000 unwanted molecules in a cycle before it will be destroyed itself. So it's a fantastic therapy that will change the game in treating autoimmune and neurodegenerative conditions. And they need about $5 to $15 million to finish their work, and they cannot get them for whole 7 years. I now try to help them, and I'm looking for investors in Israel and Canada now, and I will try to communicate with ARPA-H agency, because these people are really tired of this uncertainty, and they decided to close their company because they cannot believe they can get money for their work. These people work in the lab or in Texas University in Houston, and medical center in Texas University in Houston is the biggest medical center, the biggest university's medical center in the whole world. And I really cannot understand why no government, no private investors want to invest in real bioengineering and regenerative medicine companies. And I can see a big shift in funding from real lab work companies, vet lab companies, to so-called digital health companies. But it is important to know that human health is biological, not digital, and mobile app cannot cure people and reverse their aging. Only true vet therapy can. even though computer modeling is widely used in biomedical engineering, for example, to model some drug-to-target interaction, to predict their behavior, to construct and design new molecules, small molecules and biological molecules like proteins, for example, but it's completely another type of research. The computer modeling in biomedical engineering is a completely valid type of research that is helpful in designing new therapies. But just creating various so-called artificial intelligence systems that allegedly can mine databases of small molecules and predict their usability in off-label use, I think is complete waste of money, because we cannot get any new information from this. We just spend electricity, computer resources and investors' money for nothing, in fact. And such things harm our economy and healthcare. And how many more people must die to change the investors' attitudes towards true regenerative medicine? And I think there are two reasons why investors are in favor of so-called digital health companies as opposed to vet bioengineering companies. One of the reasons is just a lack of knowledge and a misconception. Because investors is just the people, and many of them do not have enough knowledge in physics, biology, bioengineering, medicine. They think that an artificial intelligence and so-called digital health is very popular now. Everyone talk about them and they think that it's cool things because people talk about them and they want to invest in cool things and they invest in them just because of lack of knowledge. The other reason is much more dangerous, because these people, these investors who invest in this kind of companies initially do not want to get useful results. All what I want is to invest in a company, some money, then make a bubble from that company so their price would be much bigger than their investments, and they'll then sell that company to another investor, a secondary investor, and this secondary investor will do the same. They will put some money in this company and make even bigger bubble from that company, and finally sell to the third investor, who usually will be some big pharma company that can pay billions of dollars for that company. And many big pharma companies buy company not to make some result from it, but just in case, just to get rid of a concurrence. So only result from this chain of bubbles is spend of money, and finally big pharma will pay for that without getting anything useful. And I think at least my duty is to inform public or people about these two reasons and to fight them by first giving people true information about which approaches work and which approaches do not work, and secondly say about such bad schemes when people make a bubble from companies just to sell it for high price. And on the one side of the spectra is such an amazing companies like Oisin Biotechnologies and Covalent Biosciences. And the other side of the spectra, for example, I will not name these companies to not make them free advertisement, but you all know them, and this company get really big money, hundreds of millions of dollars. For example, one of these companies got $20 million from Jim Mellon without any supporting date, and for what? And the CEO of this company pretend to be a researcher, but in fact his Facebook is full of photographs from conferences, airports, gyms and beautiful girls, and at the same time he has more publications than many real researchers. My colleagues who invented these amazing catalytic antibodies from Covalent Biosciences, for example, and he's only 45 years old, and it's a shame from my point of view. Okay, before I will continue the last section about medical regulation, I ask you for questions.
All right. Thank you, Ariel. And I will note that you are to be applauded for your efforts to save covalent biosciences, and this seems to be a larger tendency within the field of longevity, that funding has greatly diminished over the past several years, especially around 2022 to today, compared to the preceding 5 years or so. The funding has really dried up. And so a lot of companies or charities that focus on wet lab research are experiencing difficulties attracting either investors or donors. And this does need to change. And we in the Transhumanist Party would urge for more funding for such research from any sources. And if you are a private individual with the means to support such organizations, please do so. I'll also ask Art Ramon if he has any questions before we move on.
Just a few observations. Since I've sort of been involved with transhumanism, I used to see a lot of articles on super soldiers. I'm not seeing these articles anymore, any talk of super soldiers. And one of the reasons I thought they were sort of wanting, let's say I was a person involved in DARPA H, I would want superhuman super soldiers to send them out into deep space. And, in deep space, it could take forever. So you want someone with, a long lifespan. But I think somewhere along the line, they decided that maybe it's better to just go digital. You have artificial intelligence and the robotic platforms and not worry about having a long-aged human out doing deep exploration because, mental health issues, family, that could be more problematic. And maybe they just decided to cut out the super soldier program of longevity. That's my thinking from just what. And then you have the dual use of AI and using AI to help you find, a solution to longevity. So maybe they just decided to put all their money into the digital part and not the biological. Just my observation over the years.
Okay, what is the question?
No questions. It was just an observation. But if you want to respond to any of that, if you know anything of that, feel free to respond.
Yes, there is some people who talk about so-called mind uploading, but I'm quite skeptical about it because any digital copy of the human mind will be just a copy. So it will not help the biological original in any way. So I prefer another way to switch from the biological human nature to the something on another fundament. In fact, it is possible and there is no contradiction in that. The approach to do that was suggested by Polish science fiction writer Stanisław Lem as long as in 50s or 60s years of the 20th century. And the approach is that we do not make a digital copy by the human mind by some sort of recording their electrical activity. But we, since a human brain consists of individual cells, we just replace cell by cell by artificial cells. Natural biological cells by artificial cells. And during this course, which will take some long time, the brain finally will consist only of artificial cells. In such a way, we will really switch human brain from biological nature to some artificial nature without interrupting the human identity. Because human identity is a continuous process. It's not a state, it's a process, it's a continuous process. And to preserve human identity, we must not interrupt this process. So in such a way, we can replace human brain by artificial brain just by replacing cell by cell during some long time. And similar approaches are tied to so-called nanomachines approaches or nanomedicine, where small, tiny micro-nanomachines, the size of a virus or bacteria, are involved, and they program it to regenerate human organism and putting into our bloodstream. They can multiply and finally replace all human cells by artificial constructions. And so this human will not be of biological nature anymore, but some kind of sort of artificial nature. But of course, all these proposals currently are highly speculative, and there are some technical problems in implementing them. Even though they are completely valid from a theoretical point of view, unfortunately, we still do not have such a technology to implement it for now. And I, as a physicist, see some very big problems in implementing nanomachines. For example, as you know, all our big machines communicate using electromagnetic waves. waves. But the issue is that all nanomachines are smaller than the length of the electromagnetic wave, even very small wave. So to communicate they use some sort of very short wave, for example X-rays, that of course impossible inside a human organism. So we have to invent another way of communication between the net of nanomachines. So there is a big problem I'm thinking about, and I want to consult with other physicists about what they think about solving it. So this is why I think we must put all our efforts for now for a wet bioengineering approach. And of course a problem with long-term space flights can be solved by either creating nearly infinitely long humans, by implementing a damage repair approach, together with, for example, using some sort of suspended animation, which also I know there was a program in NASA to study possible suspended animation, implementing suspended animation for humans, and there was some progress, but I cannot see any news, recent news about it, so I do not know whether this program still exists or was closed. But of course this is a very important and valid area of research, suspended animation of humans. It can be used not only in long-term space flight, but to saving lives of those individuals who cannot be cured just now and can be put in a low temperature state to preserve body to be revived and cured somewhere in the future.
Yes, thank you very much for that answer. And now please proceed with the concluding portion of your presentation.
Okay, this is not in fact a conclusion. I hope a conclusion will be given by you. I will finish my conversation with a fifth part of it, and it is about problems with medical regulation. And I think that it is another problem, very big problem. One of the main problems, I think, is excessive medical regulation, which causes lack of translational research, especially in Europe, UK and the US. The irony is that these countries make almost all biomedical research on our planet, and some guys calculated that bringing new therapy to the US market now costs about $2 and $5 billion in 15 years on average. Even though on average cannot tell us the whole picture, and some new therapies like immunotherapies for cancer, for example, or gene therapies for life-threatening conditions were approved in merely 5 years. These numbers are scary. One issue is that these rules for clinical trials were written and had some sense for the pharmaceuticals therapies based on small molecules, whose behavior and whose side effects are really hard to predict. Unlike them, biological therapies, or so-called biologics, can be designed to be metabolically inert, because they just eliminate the key damage. They do not need to interfere with metabolism. So it is much easier for them than usual to avoid side effects and interactions with other therapies. For example, gene therapy does not inhibit your liver enzymes or overload your kidneys like many small molecular treatments. They consist of the same molecules, RNA, proteins, lipids, like human organisms. Thus, when they have done their job, they are just quickly degraded by cells on machinery. So all biologics consist of the same building blocks of the same molecules that all other molecules in human organisms. So there is no difference between them. And when they done their job, the cell machinery like ionases, cell enzymes like ionases, proteases, lipases, they break all these components of the gene, cell or immune or enzyme therapy to their primary molecules, and they are used again in the human organism. So this new common medicine uses completely different repair-based rather than compensatory approach, and needs completely different clinical trials protocols and the whole new health paradigm. The health paradigm which is not disease-oriented or symptoms-oriented like current medical paradigm, but damage-oriented paradigm. And I think this have to be implemented in the FDA documents and current policy making in medical area. Another much more important issue is that no one wants to take responsibility for patients' health and life. Regulators prefer patients to die from their pathology rather than from the therapy. This is because in our system, in our current system, if patient who will die anyway from his or her condition, from pathology, this is considered to be normal, and no one can be accused of crime because they cannot save a life of a patient if this patient die of an incurable condition. However, if patient dies from the new experimental therapy, all people from the regulation and clinical chain can be charged and can be accused of crime. So for them it is much safer to do nothing than do anything. They cannot be charged when millions of people die because they don't approve new experimental therapy. So they are not interested in bringing new therapies to the clinic. This is much scarier. And the most important is that it is not because of these people are bad and they hate other people and do want to cure them, but this is just a feature of the system, just because they do not want to risk their own lives and their careers. So it must to be changed, I believe. Just imagine millions of people die from conditions we can already cure, and there are few countries which has enough resources to work on them make such therapies illegal in failing attempt to save the status quo. While clinical trials bottleneck is so narrow that many therapies will not see their patients for many more years. Meanwhile, many Asian countries show green light for new experimental therapies. For example, the fast track approval system in Japan, which was introduced back in 2014 year. The system aimed to increase access to regenerative medicines by introducing laws that allow for emergent treatments to be used so long as they have been proven safe with the only hints of their effectiveness. It means in the United States terms that therapy can be used in clinic just after safety trials. Just after safety trials phase, it can be used in clinics, and the other results that need to give this therapy a real medical status will gather it during the course of its applying in clinics, so people have a chance to be cured by this new therapy if it really works. And this system is aimed to increase access to regenerative medicines by introducing laws and that allows for emergent treatments to be used so long as they have been proven safe with only hints of their effectiveness. The idea is that as patients receive these safe treatments, more conclusive data on their efficacy can be gathered thereafter. This negates the need for large-scale clinical trials that take place over several years and cost hundreds of millions. As a counterexample, in the USA, because of insane regulation, it is almost impossible to release emergent therapy to the market, and the cost of the process, including clinical trials, is at least $2 and $5 billion. Despite of the big number of inventions by American scientists and engineers, the first place in the world by invention are American researchers. Only a few of these therapies have entered human clinical trials, and only few of them have reached the market finally. And many such therapies are already in development or clinical trials, and others will arrive in the coming years. And this new emerging medicine uses completely different, as I said above, repair-based rather than compensatory approach, and needs different clinical trials protocols and the whole new health paradigm. And transitional period has already begun, and we should use it wisely to save more human lives. But on the other hand, prohibitions force people to be inventive, and biohackers arose in the USA and not other countries after all. The first biohackers were the USA researchers. So, to answer the original problem, I think there are three key points in the fight for better medicine. First, development of regenerative therapies and treatments whose mechanism is the elimination of molecular and cellular damage that causes genetic diseases and aging pathologies. Second is reduction of regulation of emergent therapies in regenerative medicine. The lowering of regulation is very important if you want to make the progress, the medical progress, more quickly. And third, last but not least, an education in regenerative medicine so that people, including physicians and policymakers, know about emergent therapies and can help in their implementation and entering the clinics, at least by fulfilling these key points. And for that, I want to establish a completely free and online biomedical engineering and regenerative medicine conference via some platform like Google Meet or Zoom to bring attention to all these problems and invite more people from all over the world to solve these problems. And I ask everyone who can help in that to help us to make this conference, because almost all conferences are offline and paid, and so not everyone have money and ability to travel to another part of the world and spend a few $1,000s to participate in conferences. And many researchers have no time, no money for that, and their work are not known for many investors, unfortunately, so it must be fixed. And finally, I want to say that if any of American policymakers, government officials, or private investors now listen to us, I would be glad to help all you as a consultant to make America more healthy and better. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Ariel, for that very thorough presentation where you covered the various facets of the problem we're seeing in terms of regenerative medicine and the field of longevity more broadly not making as much progress as we would like. And you covered both the scientific aspects of this, the lack of investment in or appreciation of the damage repair approach, as well as the political aspects with grant-giving agencies like the National Institutes of Health, as well as the excessive regulation of new medical procedures, devices, drugs, therapies that stand in the way. And then, of course, there's the broader problem of public opinion and how to get the broader society to support these endeavors, because I think politicians respond to public pressure. And if there comes about a large public constituency that will demand advancements in longevity science and in effective rejuvenation treatments using the damage repair approach, then the politicians will seek to allocate funding to make that happen. And moreover, there will be larger numbers of private investors who will also be convinced by the broader messaging to the public and will contribute their funds. But I agree that this is a difficult period for the longevity field, because it does seem like many of the best and most promising companies, as well as nonprofit organizations. A good example is LEVF, the Longevity Escape Velocity Foundation, which Aubrey de Grey now runs, need a lot more funding than they are getting. So Aubrey de Grey has stated that to conclude the second robust mouse rejuvenation study and collect all the data that would be helpful on the combinations of interventions that would be tested in that study, which is even going to be more ambitious than the recently concluded first robust mouse rejuvenation study, he is going to need on the order of $6 million. Now, in terms of how much scientific funding gets allocated in total, $6 million is not a lot of money. And if enough people of means were persuaded to understand and agree with the validity of his approach and the promising nature of his approach, that money would be forthcoming. But we have a task ahead of us. And this is a task of the broader community of transhumanists, of longevity advocates. This is why the U.S. Transhumanist Party exists. This is why we hold these virtual Enlightenment salons, to bring light to these kinds of issues, these kinds of obstacles, and deliberate about how they may overcome. So, Ariel, thank you very much for joining us today. Unfortunately, our time has come to an end, but this is certainly a discussion that needs to continue within our broader community so that we may all live long and prosper.
Thank you. Good luck.